individual instructions can either improve your team or completely destroy your entire system. And the problem is, most people are using them completely wrong. They just copy instructions from other players without actually understanding what those instructions are doing to their team. First of all, let's just say this. Individual instructions are not something you copy. They're something you set based on your own team, your own players, and your own play style. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to actually use individual instructions properly so your team can finally play the way you want. Now, first of all, I need you to understand this part very clearly, because this is the foundation of everything I'm about to explain in this video. If you don't understand this, you'll struggle to understand how individual instructions actually work. So listen carefully. When you go into individual instructions, you'll see that there are 4 slots, 2 for attack and 2 for defense. Now, this is the most important part. Your attacking instructions only activate when your team is on the ball. And this is where most people get it wrong. Then your defensive instructions only activate when your team does not have the ball. That is, when you've lost possession. So basically, your team behaves differently depending on whether you have the ball or not. And as we go further in this video, you'll start to understand exactly why this matters. Now let's start with attacking instructions. The first one here is defensive. Now, there are a few situations where this instruction becomes very useful, but the most common use is this. When you want to keep your midfielder in a more defensive position while your team is attacking. For example, if you're using players like a destroyer or a box-to-box midfielder, you already know how they behave. A box-to-box will always look for opportunities to run forward. And even some defensive-minded players can still leave their position during attacks. This is especially important when you're using a defensive midfielder that is not an anchor man. For example, an orchestrator. An orchestrator will naturally move around to receive the ball and give passing options during the attacking phase. But the problem is that movement can leave your defense exposed because that player is no longer sitting in front of your back line. So in situations like this, using the defensive instruction helps you keep that player in position and gives your team more stability while attacking. Now, another very common use you'll see in eFootball is people putting defensive on their fullbacks. But there's something very important you need to understand here. Whenever you use a player that is not naturally a fullback in the fullback position, it is usually best to put defensive on them. And here's why. The fullback role in this game is naturally very attacking. Fullbacks are designed to push forward and support the attack. That's why we have specific play styles like defensive fullbacks. Those are the ones that actually stay back. But if you use any other player there, even if it's a center back like Cannavaro or any defensive player, once they're placed in that fullback position, they become inactive in terms of play style. And because of that, they will still push forward during attacks. And this is where the problem starts. First, most of these players do not have the recovery speed of natural fullbacks. So if they go forward and you lose the ball, that delay in getting back can be the difference between stopping the attack or conceding a goal. Second is stamina. Most attacking fullbacks in the game have very high stamina, usually in the 90s. They are built to go up and down the pitch for the entire match. But most other players don't have that. So by the later stages of the game, especially around the 70th or 80th minute, they start to struggle, and that side of your defense becomes very weak. So in situations like this, using defensive on those players helps you control their positioning and avoid unnecessary problems in your defense. Now let's talk about the next instruction, attacking. So basically what this does is simple. The assigned player will position himself higher up the pitch than usual. And as you can see, this cannot be assigned to forwards, which means it's mainly for your midfielders and defenders. Now, first of all, in the current state of the game, there's really no strong reason to use this on your central midfielders unless you're running a very specific setup. So let's focus on where it's actually most useful. The main use of attacking is on fullbacks, especially when you're using a defensive fullback, but you still want him to join the attack. For example, players like Count, even though they're defensive fullbacks, they still have good crossing and good ball retention. But naturally, during attacks, they will pass the ball and just stay back. So if you want that player to actually move forward and support your attack, that's where the attacking instruction comes in. This is especially useful in systems where your fullbacks are very important in build-ups. For example, formations where you rely on width from your fullbacks. Now, let me make this very clear. It is a complete waste to use attacking on an attacking fullback because they already do that naturally. And in the same way, it is also a waste to use defensive on a defensive fullback because they already stay back by default. And one more thing, just to connect this to what we said earlier. It is also unnecessary to use defensive on an anchorman because naturally, once they pass the ball, they don't move forward anyway. So the key idea here is simple. Don't waste your instructions. Use them only where they actually change player behavior. Now, finally, my favorite attacking instruction, anchoring. And in my opinion, this is the one with the most uses. Now, what this instruction does is simple. It keeps a player from drifting out of position horizontally. So your center forward stays central and your wingers stay wide. Now, I use this instruction a lot. And one of the best ways to use it is in long ball counter. A lot of players combine anchoring with counter target. And this is very powerful because it means you always know exactly where your player is. You don't have to guess. You just play the ball into that area and he's always there. Now, personally, one of my favorite uses is putting anchoring on my center forward. It keeps him in that central position and stops him from drifting wide. So he's always available in the exact area where you need him. Another very good use is on your wingers. For example, in this setup, my plan was simple. Get the ball wide and deliver into my strikers. So what I did was this. I put Neymar on counter target and also on anchoring. That way he stayed wide at all times. He didn't drift inside. So anytime I wanted to attack, I already knew where to find him. Now, another very important use of anchoring is on your fullbacks, especially if you're using fullback finishers. Now, personally, I prefer attacking fullbacks because they make overlapping runs into wide areas. That's perfect for crosses. But fullback finishers, they don't just overlap. They also make a lot of underlapping runs coming inside, and sometimes they even run into your winger space. And that can completely mess up your attack. So what I do is simple. I put anchoring on them. That keeps them wide, prevents those unnecessary inside runs, and allows them to focus on what they're best at, delivering crosses. Now, finally, this is where a lot of people get it wrong. I would not recommend using anchoring on your midfielders because midfielders are supposed to move. They're supposed to rotate, cover spaces, and support each other. The moment you restrict them too much, you start losing that balance in your team. So the key thing here is this. Use anchoring to control positioning. But don't overuse it where movement is actually needed. Now, let's move to defense. The first one here is tight marking. Now, tight marking is used when you identify a specific player in your opponent's team as a major threat. Someone who is very dangerous on the ball, or very difficult to deal with. For example, players like Il Hachio or Batistuta. If one player is causing you constant problems, you can assign tight marking to him. But to be very honest, this is an instruction I almost never use. And the reason is simple. When you focus too much on one player, you can end up leaving other attackers completely free. Now, this instruction works better in very specific situations. For example, if your opponent is using a lone striker, someone who is isolated up front. In that case, tight marking can be effective because you're focusing on the main threat. But if your opponent is playing with two strikers, using tight marking on one of them can leave the other one completely free. And the same thing applies in wider areas. If you use tight marking on a central player, you might end up giving too much space to the wingers. So the key thing here is this. Tight marking is situational. Use it only when you're sure that one player is the main danger. Otherwise, it can actually create more problems than it solves. Now, the next instruction here is man marking. Now, this one's a bit tricky, but this is one I actually use a lot. And for me, the uses of this instruction are very specific. Now, the first major use is against dangerous wingers. If your opponent relies heavily on their wingers, you can use your fullback to man-mark that winger. And once you do this, you'll notice something immediately. It becomes almost impossible for that winger to receive the ball to feed, because your fullback is always there before him. intercepting everything. If you've ever played a match where your winger was completely locked out, like you're not even seeing the ball on that side, this is probably what your opponent was doing. And once that happens, you're forced to either abandon that wing completely or start forcing dribbles. Now, another very important use of man marking is against link-up abusers. Currently, some players rely heavily on link-up play, especially some Capello users with that over-the-top through ball, where the orchestrator midfielder is constantly looking for that pass into a goal poacher, making that run in behind. You can man mark that orchestrator. And once you limit his time and space, it becomes very difficult to connect the L and K up play, which can actually frustrate some of them. Now, another situation where this works very well is against cross spammers. So what you can do is man mark the main crosser. And once you do that, they lose that freedom to just stand there and deliver crosses. But this is important. You cannot rely on just one player, because good players will try to overload that side using quick 1-2s or overlapping runs. So you need your midfielders and nearby players to support that fullback. Now, the key idea here is simple. Use man marking to shut down specific threats. Now let's talk about counter target. This is one instruction that a lot of people already use, but there are still some things about it that many players don't fully understand. The most basic use of counter target is to keep a player high up the pitch. So whenever you win the ball, you already have someone in position to receive it immediately. This makes your counter attacks much faster because you don't need to wait for players to run forward. Now, this is not only useful for long balls, it's also very effective during situations like corners. When you're defending a corner, if you have a player on counter target, especially combined with anchoring, you already know exactly where that player will be. So once you win the ball, you can release the pass instantly and start your attack. And sometimes that quick decision is what creates a clear chance. Now, another very important use of counter target is managing certain players in your team. If you have a key attacker, someone you always want available in attacking situations, you don't really need that player tracking back all the time. So instead of wasting their energy defending, you keep them forward. This helps them stay fresh throughout the game and keeps them ready whenever you win a ball. So they can focus on making those forward runs and being a constant threat. So overall, counter target helps you attack faster, keeps your dangerous players in the right positions, and makes your transitions much more effective.